Welcome to the Glucose Never Lies podcast. This is live from the ATTD in Barcelona. I'm joined with my good friend, scientific advisor for the Glucose Never Lies, and most importantly, all-around good bloke, Professor Othmar Moser.
Hi, nice to see you again.
So it wasn't too long ago, a year ago, in the ATTD in, I can't remember where it was.
I think it was ESD in Vienna, and I only do remember because I'm Austrian, so I know it was Vienna.
Yeah, and obviously we did the podcast. The room's a little bit better this time.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've gone up in the world. We've gone from a hotel room into an apartment. But one thing when we did meet last year, we talked a lot about obviously exercise, which we might cover a little bit later on. But what we did discuss there, the CGM accuracy piece really started to kick off at EASD last year, and it became very apparent with talking to people about it. The language that's used in trying to explain that you need a strong study design and see the data is really difficult because you just anticipate if something's got a C marking, it should have data.
So I think from my perspective, as someone living with type 1 diabetes and using CGM from the very first day, with the scanning devices, then the integration within the HCL, now the integration within the fully closed loop. I think it's about the main message is transparency. So we need to understand as HCPs and at the same time as people living with type 1 diabetes, what is happening with my CGM trace in that or another situation, and is it comparable to my, for example, blood glucometer. This is what I do see. I do a finger prick, I have a glucometer, and I want to know when I'm exercising, for example, it's always under or overestimating. Oh, when I have an pizza, the CGM is always elevated a little bit. But I think it's about having all the data available. We're publishing and the companies we're publishing, and then we are living in a good world. I think it's CGM, all of them are good when compared against 20 years. This must be totally clear. But the knowledge were a small Achilles heel improved the life of us as researchers, of the companies, and at the same time of the people living with type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with that. And we sort of sat down and said, okay, if we're going to get a strong clinical voice out there, obviously you're very well known in the space. I've got a lot of time and energy that can be, if funneled in the right way, it can really kind of make things happen quickly. But then we sort of said, well, we'll need to find out the opinions of the people who are leading the major organizations. So obviously you reached out to the ASD side, to Chantal, and obviously you know Tade very well. I reached out to some of my pediatric colleagues and also some of the people I'd worked with on previous CGM accuracy paper. And everyone was interested in the concept because they were having the same challenges trying to explain to their colleagues who are diabetologists, like, what is all this study design and transparency? So we kind of knew we had something. And the bit that makes me laugh is I wrote the first draft and we can't bother looking at it. It's going to need a bit of work, but it's good to go out to the first set of people. And we did it like a modified Delphi where we just didn't say who else was in, just sent it out to the people who we thought would be really useful. Some people blind, but a lot of people came back positive, but it was really interesting without that groupthink. There was a lot of good stuff that came out. I don't think it would have come out if it would have been in a group, would have got quashed.
I do expect the same, and this is what we see so often in these so-called advisory reports where we are discussing novel technologies and all the stuff. So if one has a very strong opinion that other people are following, so I do see that this blinding in this process of setting up the paper, and maybe you have set it up. So I was just supportive, to be honest. So you are the brain.
When you get 20 back and they're all saying something slightly different, and you go from the 1,700 word thing to then up to 5,000, and then you overdo it, and then you send it back out, and you're like, no, it needs to go back from 5,000 down to 3,000, please, with some tables. But over a few drafts, what became clear was three concepts which you decide. First of all, we need transparency data, which we'll dig into.
Which is, from my perspective, the most important part. It can be a very accurate CGM. It can be, not so accurate. But as long as there is the knowledge, where is the Achilles heel within the 24 hours line, it's totally fine from my perspective.
Well, you take that from here, and I think that's really worth drilling in, because we are going to get into the weeds about study design, and we're going to get into the weeds about calibration and alignment. And they only exist, that data, for three or four sensors. We have knowledge, deep knowledge on them. And you go to it and walk around the tech fair ATTD today, there is about 15 CGM companies.
Yes.
And obviously I'm a pain in the ass to them, because I'll just go up and go, wow, you've got a MAD of 6.7%, and it's 21 days this sensor's lasting. That's amazing. I'd love that. Do you mind just showing me where that data came from the 6.7? Oh, it's data on file. You have to come into the medical booth and like sign away your life. And then when you get there, they give you a little card that has got a scrap of data on with no study design, no information about the patient. Just, we had 3,000 paired readings, and this is like, it may be a very good sensor, but without having visibility of the data, it's an unknown risk. And when we've got good devices out there where we know the risk, it seems incomprehensible to actually take that risk.
And again, to be honest, I prefer using a CGM with a mark of 18 or 19. But when I exactly do know where the system is struggling, I would prefer it over a CGM with a mark of 3%, where you do not know, is there any issue? Are the data really that accurately performed, which we all would assume? So again, transparency, this is so important. And then I think everyone is happy from all sides. I think, but this is what we did also see during ATTD already at some posters, at some oral presentations. Companies and also researchers are more open now about the data. And this is a very good initiative, which goes back to your paper. I'm quite sure also to the other papers that have been published in a similar way, that the data are now fully available. This makes life easy for all of us.
Yeah, and absolutely. I mean, when I first did the CE marking paper back in 2022-23, you couldn't get the data on file from a lot of the things. At least this time now, what we've done with the DSM forum in the UK is we don't quite have we've got iCGM, we've got some recommendations for the IFCC, but nothing is like set in stone for everybody.
Yeah.
So we just pulled together what are the 5 or 6 really important questions to ask and give each CGM their study a score out of 5. If I would have done that in 2022, I'd only be able to fill out 3 of them.
Yeah.
Where now it's kind of like can fill out 10. And of those, 5 have got a marker of 5 or above. So for us, we're like, well, if 5 have got a study design score of 5, where they've got lots of data, where they've got it tested reasonably well on type 1 diabetes, etc., then it makes sense. We know the risk of those. Why would we compromise when there are 5 good options on something when you're talking about insulin dosing and you're only taking risks of people's lives? So we've developed that, which we'll drop in the show notes, which kind of puts us into the realm of, if you're going to test a CGM and you're going to want to use it for insulin dosing, you're ideally going to want to stress test that sensor in the potential hardest day it will have, because if it performs well in there and it's reliable and usable for insulin dosing, then all the other days are covered. But if you don't test that day, it may be good, but you don't know. And I think that's the point now where we've got transparency of data is quite decent. And now we're to level 2, which is how do we make sure that the CGMs are tested in an effective way? So where do you see that situation at the moment?
So let's focus on a stress test. There are 2 very nice stressors. One is a meal challenge. One might be an exercise challenge. I think for the meal challenge, it's even quite easy, because the meal challenge would always be associated with an increase in glucose. Even if it's high protein, you might go up a little bit. So what we do not see is a decrease when you consume carbs. But this is still a stress test. For example, play a little bit with the insulin dose when someone would forget. I'm unsure if this should be a general recommendation to test it, but a stress test based on meals should be included. For example, we have a study ongoing now with kids, and they have a pizza challenge, a spaghetti challenge, and what is it? I think further rice curry or whatever challenge.
You also don't eat any of those.
I'm fully in. But it's fun, first of all, for the kids involved with trial. But we see also this hyperglycemic values we can We can assess the peaks. We can assess with a very high rate of change in glucose when it's dropping. Same for exercise. For exercise is quite diverse. We see different responses. There might be an increase, stable decrease, but from my perspective, it should also be included. And why is quite clear? We do recommend a physically active lifestyle to people with type 1. And then we should test all the devices also during a physically active lifestyle. This holds also true for artificial pancreas, for CGM. And again, it's about supporting people with type 1, supporting the HCP, and also supporting the companies that they are receiving further data to improve algorithms of CGM, algorithms of automatic dosing of insulin. So it's a win-win-win. And this is, I think, what we are all aiming for.
I mean, I'm definitely going to come to your 2 recent publications where your PhD student, Serena, has done great work and really drew out something which was, I guess it just corroborated some of the other things that we'll get to, but it's really nice to see it done exercise personally, because as you mentioned there, you did the paper back in 2020 where you showed, accuracy does drop off during exercise, like I was saying, and we've got a lab and recommendations. So we'll get to that, but absolutely. So stress test. And this is why the DSM forum chart where you get studies at a score of 5. If I was a manufacturer, I could gain that. What I would do, because you have to have a percentage of readers, 8% in the very high, 5% in the very high, and 8% in the very low. If I knew that, I could just be a manufacturer and go, I'm going to go to an investigator, and this is how my protocol. Bring them in one day with a glucose level of like 200 or 11. Give them a little bit of carbs, pushing into the 16, 17, nice and slowly, leave them there for 8 hours to affect your values. Next time you bring them in, start with them at about 5 or 100 milligrams, a little bit of drop down. So you get the coverage, but you don't get what happens in real life. In contrast, the publication by the IFCC team suggested the best way to stress test to get everything covered, both the fast rises, the fast falls, the highs and lows, is the meal and insulin challenge on the same day. So 60 grams of carbs, push it up. When you get high, big insulin drop down. You therefore cover all of the range, and you also put it in the hardest day to have. And then if you know it's accurate there, the rest is cool.
I think, to be honest, this is real life situation. I am quite aware that we have also other opportunities, but it's not performable globally. So we have in Graz, for example, hyperglycemic clamp procedures. So we could do it also artificially, but this is not what it is about. It's not. So we had also requests to do CGM assessments during hypoglycemic clamp procedures. So you fix them on a 3.9, on a 3.0, on a 2.5, and then let them go up again. But from my perspective, it should be extremely practical. So maybe the 60-gram carbs challenge is a proper way that reflects real life situation and having this. So maybe it's not just solely, you were correctly saying, about highs and lows. I think, one driver for performance struggles is the rate of change in glucose. We all know, but at the same time, we must be clear, how often do you blood glucose assessment from fingertip, exactly when you're high and low. So it's a further safety tool to do blood glucose assessment, but at the same time, from receiving approval and assessing MART and error grid analysis and rate of change dependencies. Try everything to include in the study protocol. This is always my impression. We tried quite often doing this. I think we have over 20 publications, mainly within exercise, around exercise and CGM performance. And it's of interest and should be of interest for all of us today.
Well,
it's just to check my glucose.
You go for it. But it's at the day of life. You're checking your glucose now. Like you're making that decision based off that CGM value. Whatever you're doing now, you're deciding whether you're okay. Do I need some carbs? Do I, I'll give yourself a bit more insulin, whatever. Your next 20 to 30 to 40 to 2 hours is based off what you've just done off that video. So you need to have a level of confidence that it's never going to be perfect, but it's going to be accurate enough to make decent decisions. The vast majority. Consider this. If you go to a car dealership and you're offered 2 cars and you're told that they both drive maximum 80 miles an hour on the motorway and they're both equal cars, one is cheaper. or half a price, but the rest is the same. And then he said, okay, we had a safety test. And one car has had, you read the documents, it said, we did a crash dummy test into a wall at 10 miles an hour and it was fine.
Yeah.
And you have a look at the second one, and he said, we crash tested 80 miles an hour into a wall and it was fine.
Yeah.
Now, both cars could be equal, but which car are you happy to get into and take your kids into?
Yeah. So it's first of all depending where I would be living and how much money I would have.
What would you like to have?
I want to have a safe and cheap option if I could choose. And if the safe option is more expensive, I would pay, from my perspective, for the more expensive option, but I want to be safe. I think in general, we must be clear, all CGMs there that are approved are safe.
Yeah.
Compare it always against what was 20 years ago happening with CGMs.
Yeah.
So we were happy with them.
I remember the soft safety. It was like a javelin.
Yes. So we should be happy. So think about it, about your diagnosis, how it was like, how it was. So
I'm trying to frame this here. Yeah. So basically, all the ones that I talked about. So you've got the Roche Smart Guide, you've got all the Freestyle Libre products, you've got the Dexcom products, and you've got the Medtronic.
Yeah.
They're the ones with a Surgery Design score of 5 out of 5. They're the ones personally I would use. They're the ones personally I would support the people who I was going and say their data is sufficient enough to understand the risk. And then the understand the risk part is a 20/20 and a 40/40. And this is going to come to the finger pricking. So the easy way of thinking it, I'm not going to go through what 20/20 is, you can look it up. But essentially, if whatever percentage your readers do in 20/20, you're not going to make a mistake, a good clinical decision. That doesn't mean it's spot on to the finger prick, but it generally means it's within 1.5 to 2. You're not going to make a mistake.
Yeah.
And then the second metric is 40/40, which is a wider metric. And basically, the percentage of readings that fall outside of that are the ones that will definitely lead to an insulin dosing error. Either too much insulin or you'll lower and maybe pause the insulin in the system. Yeah. And here's the key part, and this is what I want to bring you in.
Yes.
Even the best ICGM sensors, the best sensors in the world, have between 1 and 0.5% of those readings outside of that. How many readings a day do they do? 200 and something like that, 285 over a month period. You're going to have guaranteed at least 5 or 6 occasions over a month where you're going to be outside of that. And the key point here is that's amazing that it's only those number of readings. And the CGMs are so good. But those 5 or 6 readings are the critical point where you're making a potentially life and death situation decision, or a system is making it for you based on that value. And you need to have
yes and no. So the issue is, for sure, there's a clear, so we have this clear assumption, wrong reading, wrong decision could be fatal.
I mean, I'm talking that's like that's the percentage chance of that is extremely minute. However,
and we do that
when there's a chance,
and we do not have at the moment these data. So we must be clear. So there's no evidence out that saying due to this 1% of out of the space readings something happened. It's also difficult collecting this data.
Okay, I think I say something there as well. When I'm presenting there, like there is a worst case scenario. People dying with diabetes all the time. Yeah. And with CGM compared to finger pricks I had before, that number will have gone down massively. It's massively improved. So I'm not in any way saying, oh, do you know what, it's worse than it was? The baseline case would have been, the number of deaths would have been off the chart. It's gone down massively because all of But when you and I live with diabetes, you know it's still not a non-zero chance that if you had the unfortunate thing of a collection of readings over a period of time that are outside that 40/40 for whatever reason, there is a minuscule chance that it would lead to a very tricky situation if you haven't been educated and given the tools how to recognize and what to do. Yeah. But when there's a non-zero chance, you always have to apply the precautionary principle. And I'm sure you have with you, and I have with me, something that means to go when you get that situation, go, just doesn't smell right to me. What should I do just to check? But you're about to tell me you were taught that. I was taught that.
I was educated that it wasn't exactly that way. So first of all, I had no CGM in my diagnosis, so I had a full understanding of blood glucose measurements. And I think this is why I still do on some occasions a blood glucose measurement. First of all, I'm interested in it. This is my personal reason. But I do see, just for me, sometimes that when I'm in exercise and I have already symptoms, that there is this lag time. This is already known. This is what I do. But what I wanted to say before, we see more and more youngsters with type 1, they have the diagnosis, they never do blood glucose assessment. So they are so confident and trust. And now comes a critical mind. I think you and myself are idiots, because I'm quite sure if our diagnosis would have been 5 years ago, we would have maybe a completely different mindset for our own diabetes, and we would not do any blood glucose assessment. This is what I would expect.
Do you think
we do?
I'm
so educated with doing blood glucose measurements, so it's part of my diabetes history. But I'm quite sure if my diagnosis would have been 5 years ago, I think I do maybe 1 or 2 blood glucose assessments a month. I think, I have no clue, but
I don't know. I think different, because I reckon for you, your amount of detail, you would have gone in, and this is a key point here for people. You would have gone in and looked at the accuracy of the good finger prickers, the isolated ones. They have over 95% of readings in 50-50. And I just told you the best CGM are on 90% 2020. So they've got 50-50 is even more accurate, and they're even higher at 95, and a lot of them at 99%. That basically tells you almost, and then with non-outside 40, non-outside 40. So you never have that problem with a finger pricker unless you do something, as long as sample's good.
So I think this is a major, very important information. This is what we are still teaching. Always take care that there are no sugars on your finger when you do, for example, like calibration or whatever. Wash your hands in advance. And the thing I'm always afraid of is, so I'm doing it because I'm extremely interested in the CGM story for myself. But
also you're checking the where is it lying in relation to my gold standard 95% above 15-15. Occasionally just checking in. Which sensor do you use, if you're not
I'm jumping around at the moment between Abbott, because I can be honest, I'm using an AID system and I only have 2 options. And this is Dexcom and it's Abbott. And this is why I'm playing around. So I'm quite depending on the situation where I am, which sensor I do want to use. I also used the Medtronic sensors. I used the Sinocare sensors, both channels. So I'm interested in it. And also, for example, for Sinocare, it worked quite absolutely well for me. So what I wanted to say is, what we also see quite often, and I have no real interpretation, but for example, the Medtronic sensor is extremely well working, and the Abbott is not working. And the Dexcom is working in the middle, so we still see this individual. I don't know what this is.
I can answer that question.
Do not answer with calibration.
No, calibration. No, it's a calibration.
I'm not calibration, but I mean algorithm calibration.
No, not that either. It's not that. So
but I would be curious.
So if you look, the best study for me is that 3 sensor study. Although it's on 24 people, the beauty of it is they've got something called the CGD, which is a set of metrics which it does the ICGM stuff. But what it does nicely, it puts this plot of the individual sensors of where their bias is to the comparator. So if the comparator is venous glucose or capillary, whatever, you've got this line across the middle, which is we'll call capillary. And across the 24 sensors, if you start at the end, those are under reading, you've got probably 15% reading way under and 15% reading way over. And in the middle, you've got a nice selection. So you just think, if you've done that and you can see the lines across from Medtronic, Dexcom, and Abbott, and you could see if this day I got the sensor of the G6 that was on the far on the left here, and I had the Medtronic on the far on the right, it's expected over 24 sensors. But with more experience, it's like, oh my God, find out. And
I think this is very important information. So I get so often asked, which AID system are you using? Which sensor are you using? And this is not the global answer that might be correct. So I choose the sensor that is exactly based on that, what you're saying, with me accurate. So it could be the new one, the Instinct. It could be the G12 of Dexcom that might come up in 5 years. So it's an individual thing. And we are at the moment analyzing mainly median curves in our accuracy assessment. But from my perspective, in my research group, we want to follow more showing in and table for each single individual the full data, because then you see where the median line, the interquartile range, where the standard deviation is coming from. So what we learned when we have written this paper, or I was being allowed to be part of this, will show for all the future accuracy data. So it's not just CGM, for general accuracy assessment. I will show each individual response in each situation in one table. And if the journal does not allow me to include it as a main graph, it's in the supplementary material.
Do you know the graph that I love is that the same graph, but it also reminds me, this will resonate with you as an exercise researcher. And if Mike Liddell is listening and Des is listening, it definitely will be, because I hounded them for ages on this piece. Is they did a study of about 120, so they did a secondary analysis of 4 studies put together, where they said the higher they start, the harder they fall. But then it
wasn't kids as far as
kids,
with this graph showing
so you
the
had
delta
drops. The drops on the far left was those who didn't drop at all. On the far right was the greatest drop. And obviously the mean drop was about like 2 millimoles per liter. When you have from the little as a rise of 2 all the way to a drop of 20. And then, but obviously if you just read the paper, you go, well, on average, when I do 45 minutes, the average drop's 2. Well, the average drop of 2 is about right for about 30% of those people. But yet the message that goes out is...
And I think I think this is true for all the studies.
Of course it is.
So the reality of the mean holds true for around 30 up to 40% of people.
Unless you've got a ridiculously flat response, which never happens to individuals.
It's not the normal response, But I think it comes back to the first part. Transparency.
Exactly.
Showing what.
That's why I like the CGD, because you don't get, you do get all those metrics, but you get a visual where you go, and I looked at it, I went, holy crap, but it also, when that's calibration on, which is going to get there, is, I'm just going to box this off and say, for me personally, any of those 5 senses we've got off to out of 5, I can make them work for me. I know. And I'm happy with 90% 2020, and we also know there's a risk of 1%. So massive point, if you're listening to this, and I was going to say, it's not just people with diabetes. We've now got 3 new nurses in the team. They've only known CGM. And what's they being told, maybe by us, maybe by the manufacturers, is kind of like, these factory calibrated systems are absolutely, I've been around them and asked the stand, said, what do you teach about blood glucose testing? All these factory calibration systems, they're better. I was going to say they're better than fingers. Like, you got all in 95% and 15 on your sensor. Seriously. And then they go, oh, what do you mean? It's like, you're not even in the same ballpark. So it's if in doubt, get the blood glucose meter out, then it will be a case of a couple of times a month. You just need to do it. And then you've got a choice. If you've got a system where you can optionally calibrate, you can get for me personally, that's why I choose an optionally calibrated one. I'm not saying which one it is, because it doesn't matter. But when I'm in that situation, my psychological confidence in the next few hours is all about, do I think it's back on what my finger pack is? So if I need to be able to actually calibrate, I don't have that period of thing just hit sense off. And that's just personally for me, because I do fingerprint. But then I speak to the nurses who come on board. We don't really teach. And they don't know. They don't think it's
maybe the truth is in the middle.
I'm a freak one side.
We are the freaks. Often,
and measurements.
Maybe the answer is in the middle. So what I would prefer for myself is, sometimes I'm a little bit overreacting in regards to blood glucose measurements. That I'm fully But to be honest, there is always some variability, and it's not this worst case scenario. And I never did detect it for myself in this, 30 years I have type 1 or whatever. So maybe the answer is exactly in the middle. I think we still need to teach how to do a blood glucose assessment, mainly based on symptoms. And if you see a glucose trace that makes no sense, that you are early dropping after a meal, that you feel confident afterwards, do a blood glucose assessment. But in general, let it roll and focus on your symptoms. I learned it. I had 5 blood glucose measurements per day available at my diagnosis. And normally I would have been only 3 per day when I had my diagnosis. But I was in the national triathlon team for Austria, so I was allowed to do 5 blood glucose measurements a day.
Does that make you about 60 now, does it? And we should about 60 years old, doesn't it? Maybe about doing 2 or 3.
But it also worked, but it meant at the same time that HbA1c was higher. So we have the beauty that is called CGM, and I think we can fully trust, but we should trust. But if there are symptoms and you feel better doing a blood glucose assessment, do whatever fits best for you. I mean, so this is my message.
The summary for me of this is CGMs, if they're a study design score of 5 out of 5, they've got accuracy of at least 90% 20/20 and less than 1% or 0.5% 40/40. They are amazing. The best thing ever. Personally, made a career out of it, and love it. But a couple of times a month, you may need to do it. Whether you choose or not to is your choice, but you should be taught that that's the case, and you should be taught two very important things. Number one, it should be an ISO standard blood glucose meter.
This is important.
Number two, the specific scenarios when you're kind of got symptoms for low and maybe you don't know what's going on. If in doubt, check. And the same on the high side, like you know yourself that you look at your CGM and you go, with what's gone in the last 3 hours, I should not be this number. And if you have that feeling, just do a finger check.
And what we do also say is when we have, for example, so we sometimes see a situation that someone has symptoms of hypoglycemia with a blood glucose reading of about 7.5 millimolars. And then there's no blood glucometer around, and then they do wait to consume carb. That's where I was in. Go in with carbs. Instead, you are a little bit elevated. It doesn't manage to wait for a blood glucose measurement.
And you're a bit pissed off later, but you're better than being completely hypo.
Exactly. So being a little bit higher is better than being extremely low. So, but I think in general, from my perspective, you can trust the CGM completely if you find the right CGM that works for you. And if you have symptoms, choose to do the blood glucose assessment if you want to, or go in immediately with some carbs. So I think that everyone is.
I want to say this now, and this is for all manufacturers, is also they need to be careful with their messaging. Because if their messaging is the CGM is more accurate than an ISO standard finger pricker, then number one, that's categorically incorrect. And number two, if within their literature, it doesn't state quite clearly that finger pricks from an isometer are superior, you may need to occasionally do it, which they all say, but they're a little bit loose with the wordings, whether that's the main players or the new ones. I've been around and looked at them all and asked them what's their advice in there, but not finger pricking. They've got wrong. There's no mention that if you come into there, like,
I'm sure if there's still the symptomatic storyline, you should do a confirmatory blood glucose measurement. But I'm unsure.
This has had only a drug system. It's like CE marking, just pass it down and jump it out like a sweet. So basically, manufacturers have a responsibility to put it in their literature. Healthcare professionals in their teaching programs have a responsibility to teach it. If they choose not to, that's fine, but you have to cover yourself because it's a non-zero risk of every bad event. And when that's the case, if you're thinking about it's you or your kid, you want to be taught that from the beginning. But all that being said, roll it up. These things are amazing. We're not saying go back to doing finger pricks. We're saying go back to doing finger pricks once a month, but have the kit with you along with a ketone meter. If the proverbial hits the fan, you know what to do. You're taught what to do and you're taught the rest of it. And when you come to clinic once a year or twice a year, what we're starting to do now is going, can you show me a blood glucose meter? And then you go, we haven't got one. It's like, but okay, they'll give you one next time. You need to bring one. Tell me how you do blood glucose test. And it's hilarious because you kind of get it out. You jab the finger that's squeezing the end of it. Like, let's go back to basics.
And always keep in mind you can rip it off. So it may be not in the discussion of inaccuracy, but when I walk with food or when I walk into the door, and I'm losing my CGM. And then you're, for example, sitting on an airplane and you cannot change. So when I'm traveling, especially, or when I'm far away from home, I always have my glucometer with me, just for, I don't want to go home and insert a one day for 2 hours, 1 hour, whatever.
Oh, probably only so rough today. So I want to cut. I know we've hammered that point. It probably sounds like we're going, and to me, this is the situation. I feel like the education and the evolution of CGM has just gone half a step too far. It's gone 100 steps forward. I believe you see go half a step back and say, well, glucose meters are still always going to be more accurate. There will be those occasional times. So let's teach it properly and let's be honest and open about it.
I don't think there will always be more accurate. So what I do expect in the future, and I do think maybe it's not mentioned in the interstitial space.
Well, if it's in the blood. If it's in the blood.
But what I do see, and I'm quite sure that the companies might achieve, let's say, the mark, because it's the most common below the 5%. In a few, I'm quite sure we, as we are sitting here, will see a CGM and we'll wear a CGM, maybe not next year, maybe 20 years.
I'm a better student on that. I'm a better student. You've got an enzymatic.
I'm going to the 20 years, the companies are fully aware this. So they always, even if you're achieving marks of, at the beginning below 20, below 15, below 10%, I think they're still working to improve it.
Final one on this piece, because I know you said this loads of times, exactly the same to me. If I wanted to prove that during exercise you need to have a finger pricker with you, I can do it right now. I push my glucose to 12. I give myself a whacking dose of insulin. I'd wait for it to kick in for about half an hour, and then I would go for a run for 15 minutes. And I bet you, when I got back, my finger prick would be 2, and my CGM would be about 9. I did it loads of times. And it's because when it drops so rapidly like that, the lag time, as you've shown, increases from 2 minutes to 15 minutes. And that it's not fault on the CGM, it's just changing physiology. So respect during exercise. Like they drop. It's not a
technological lag time, it's a physiological lag time, and this is normal glucose. But as you were saying, when people are aware, then we treat already, and this was why we defined the threshold of 7 millimole per liter, that early with carbs to overcome this physiological lag time.
So Sabrina, I'm sorry about this, but this is your next study. I would love you to do a CGM accuracy on exercise. You start the glucose level at 12 with no insulin bolus on board, and you start with 0.15 units per kilo or 0.2 units per kilo an hour ago, and you measure the accuracy over a 20-minute exercise. I guarantee you the MAR on the first one will be about 10%. On the second one, it will be about 40%. And it just shows that high insulin on board, rapid movement of glucose is the time. That's why you set your CGM target high during exercise. And it's why you always have your finger pricker with you, because you've also got sensor losses and stuff. Exercise is so essential.
Just bring it with you for
exactly. Well, I think we've done that step. But I hope that's a message that resonates with people, especially if you're a new listener and you have never done finger pricking. Like, what's the point? There is a point. It's a rare event which has potentially catastrophic things. You need the ability just to wipe it away. And if you have a good glucose meter and you know what to do, it's a no event for you. So write it off. So we've got study. Now we've got the stress test. The IFCC did it. And what we saw is when you do a stress test, something becomes very apparent. These CGMs are taught by a data set how to trace the glucose, how to follow it in a training data set. Now, depending on how that training is done and depending on how the algorithm responds to fast moving of glucose will depend on how well it tracks in real life. And they will all have something different because they're all proprietary. You don't know what they are. They all use different data sets and they all have different mindsets. So, for example, if I was a company, one of the first companies to come out with the AID system, do you want a sensor that tracks right on the glucose, bearing in mind what I just told you before, that over a batch of 24 sensors, some are going to under-report, some are going to over-report. If you get one of those over-reporters and you're in the top end of capillary glucose, you're going to be over-delivering. You would destroy the field of AID therapy. So it makes sense for the early players to underdo the glucose to prevent over-delivery, which is a safety-minded, very sensible decision. But then as the sensors progress, potentially go, maybe we don't need to be as safe as that. We can get in the actual space. Or they've got a better algorithm because their engineers have figured out a way. But what you did see in that study is when they put the stress test on, 2 sensors, I'm not going to mention names, just no point, 2 sensors tracked between capillary glucose and venous glucose, which goes up by the difference is 30%. They tracked right in the middle and back down. One sensor read only. And that sensor is absolutely a great sensor. It's safe. You'll never have the injury. But when you looked at the data, that sensor reported for the same people 10% more time in damage than the other one. And that's not bad or good. It's a decision made by whoever the engineer is that when the glucose is rising like that, be conservative because we don't want to overdo with insulin. And there's nothing wrong with that.
And so again, for me as a patient, and you were talking also about the history, I think, or when I would have a child with type 1 diabetes, I'm quite safe with the safe solution. With this little under-reporting, but at the same time, you would correctly say if you have the overall assessment, this has for the 3 months curves assessment of time in range, time in diabetes, it has influenced results. So maybe again, the truth it might be in the middle.
But, the beauty of that study is it revealed that actually the calibration algorithms that these things have for the 3 popular ones that we know are quite different. What about all these other ones that we've got no data? They could be reading above capillary.
Yeah.
That's why you can't take the risk, because you don't know. With those 3, I know exactly. And this comes to the point, because then we know in that one study, over-reported time in range by 10%. And then you did an exercise with Sabrina, and you found what?
So I think we found in general very similar results in parallel use. It was not really hardcore exercise we did, but we did something like yoga, we did Nordic walking.
A lot of people doing yoga are happy with you now.
Yeah, sure. And it's for in exercise, the similar situation as on the, this resting situation we had there in hotel settings. So all the participants were sleeping in a hotel. They were constantly with us. And, these data has been confirmed. Again, all the CGMs used were in general accurate. They must be safe. They're fully approved. But I think what we did see after performing the study, that all the individuals, the participants, wanted to see their individual data. And what we did see was that they choose then a different sensor, but some also moved to this, the opposite. Some of them, for example, moved to the so-called less accurate sensor, because for them we were accurate. So this was the story. And this was a thing I was not expecting at that extent.
And did people who were one that says that was underreporting the same as that, did they choose the one did they decide to move the one that actually went closest to the actual glucose physiological space, or did they stay with the safe interest on average?
So they did not ask. I could not answer. So they were saying, show me the data, and then they received the data for it. So the absolute difference is
you've got to follow. Sabrina, you've got to follow. You've got to go and find out those issue.
So we did send it to them simply, and then afterwards we received the email a couple of weeks ago, and I moved to this or to that center. But it was not just that all of them moved to one. So we had all the options, and we did not.
I'd love to know that.
We did not expect that.
I would love to know the ones what they were on.
The reasons we did not ask, we were simply
Sabrina, get on the case. I want to find that information. So what we're saying here is, and this is backed up because this was in the clinical position paper, is what you've shown, what Guido's shown in his study, what you showed in your exercise study, is that some read in the physiological space between capillary and venous, and some read underneath, likely because of calibration things. And what that means is there's a difference in timing range for the same individual for some glucose. And then you look at the AID literature, and what you find similarly is that AID system that uses that sensor who underreports glucose and overreports timing range, they have 75-76% timing range with an A1C of 7% or 52. And then for some of the other sensors that use those ones that measured in the space, had a timing range of 65%, and also HbA1c. So the message there is clear. They're both safe, they're both accurate, they both get the same HbA1c, they just have different timing ranges. And that's not a problem unless you know that. So you know that, and I know that, and I know the people who are using that system that over-report timing range. You come back to my clinic and you put 70% in now. Unfortunately, you don't get the pat on the back. You're fully done. I'm optimizing your settings because I know you need to get to 75 to get the same. Joe Boggs, who comes in a different system with a sensor that reads in the space, that doesn't underreport. And I know that. So none of my patients are disadvantaged. But because an international target's a 70% timing range, most clinicians, once you're going 70%, you're like, you've hit this, I'm not going to pressure you anymore. I'm just going to, and that for me is a bit unfortunate. And it's also unfortunate if people see that 75% in the literature or on What's magazines and go, that's the 75% because that gets more timing range, and that's actually not going to convert. They do get more timing range, so the marketing is correct, but they don't get the future benefit. So I think as these stress tests come out, first thing we'll notice, as we're seeing, is this big difference. But then I think once that becomes clear, what are the manufacturers going to do? They're going to align to right in the middle. They're going to change the calibration algorithms.
And I think this is the good thing on doing research. And this study from Guido was massively discussed globally in all the different ways, in positive and negative ways. But what is happening, companies and researchers are still improving. And this is what it is about. So
it's not blame.
So let me say something very clear. I'm not happy with the amount of 7%.
No.
But this is what I was saying. So, and this is what we do see. The companies are chasing it massively. And I think this is what I was saying, 20 years, mark of 5% for all the devices, maybe. And at the same time, it's a company. Companies need to sell, to have proper numbers.
Yeah.
But at the same time, to have money to do research. So it's a cycle. I would not call it a vicious cycle, but it's a cycle. So I think it's for a good thing having the extremes and studies, because now everyone is again improving.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't want to be at the final stage. I constantly want to improve devices.
It's like, if the manufacturer will be listening to this, who sort of, who underreports the glucose and reports time and range compared to the others, we kind of listen to them. These guys are kind of saying that, I think, no, they get exactly the same HMC. So in terms of what's going to happen to you in the future, they're all as good as each other. You just can't claim superiority. But what you could do, you could probably claim you get the same HbA1c, but reality is we're probably safer because you're never going to over-deliver the insulin because it's an individual thing. If I was looking for the company, I would be thinking about that.
I think it holds true for all companies. So we did spot, so underestimation, not a question, it comes in detail in which situation is improving what. And then everyone is improving.
I can't wait to see the AID system that has now got one of these sensors that underreports. Yeah. And now they've got an option for the other sensor that reads in this data. So we're using a short bit of data.
And this is what it is about. Now I can choose.
Yeah.
I think to be honest, so if I would be the boss of all the big companies for AIDs and so CGM, I would be forcing everyone that for every insulin pump, I can choose whatever sensor I want to choose.
100%. And what actually hopefully will show, or over time as data comes out, it appears from what we've seen here at ATTD is that the both sensors get the same time and range, which means that the algorithm is good. Because in theory, the sensor that reads in the physiological space is going to be going up higher after eating. So it's actually able to keep up with it and attain the same time and range. My guess, and I'm happy to come on here whenever the data is published and go, I'm totally wrong, would be if you follow those for 90 days, you just switch to be 90 days on the sensor under reports, in theory, and 90 days on the sensor reports. You get if the algorithm's good as it appears to be, you're going to end up with the one with the reports in this space having a 0.5%. Yeah. See, then that company can go, we have superior outcomes.
Exactly.
And that for me would be great, because if you've got a clear winner on time in range, if that's what your good shit is, you choose that. Everyone wants that, not 5%. But I can't wait for that study to come. I'm happy to be wrong and go, do you know what? That's happened and that's science. But it's good. It's good for it. So just to summarize that, we've getting there towards transparency, but we need it clearer on CE marking. FDA is absolutely fine, but we need to be driving. If you're a healthcare professional or a person with diabetes, if you go to ATTD or you see someone, you ask that question, whether you can go to the DSM forum chat and find the study design scholars who've done it for you. So there's a simple thing. Don't accept a MARD number is number one. Number two, we ideally need stress tests to make sure you have the worst possible day is covered. And then also that reveals where systems are reading whether they're under or over. And this is a new concept that potentially means for some of the sensors, you'll need a little bit more time in range to get the same HbA1c. But it's easy to get that extra time in range because it's not going up as fast. So it's not like it's a disadvantage. Yeah. It's just knowing that when you go back to your clinician or yourself, that if you're one of those sensors that's starting to read, you just need 5.5% more, but it's going to be easy to do. Yeah. So it's not a good or bad thing. It's even safer. No problems with that. So, but once we get clearer on that piece and we know which sensors are there, people go on the glucose analyzer, it's actually documented where sensors read and what you might want to consider. But ultimately, from the manufacturer's point of view, I'll say this I did a webinar for Insulet and we discussed that 70% time isn't equal. And the whole purpose of that was, obviously for them, they wanted to show that there was no difference in terms of HbA1cs, which the systematic reviews show. So actually from a long-term perspective, it doesn't mean anyone's better or worse, but the point of doing it for me was to say, the people who are listening who are using the other product is to the clinicians listening go, oh, so if they're coming on that, they're probably going to need 75%. So if I've helped 3,000 people, via clinicians to go, we're just going to nudge you up. That is a massive win because there's just knowledge and there's no good or bad. As I said, I think it should be easy to get it because
it's about knowing it.
Of course it
Because
is.
then I think it's fine. And I think, again, we are all on the same route. Improvements.
Yeah,
It never stops to improve.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So on improvements and on changing perspectives and on what we once believed to be the best advice.
Yeah.
Again, it's kind of like it's not painful. I think it's great that you're actually and more than willing to dig in, ask the questions, then go back.
Yeah.
Do you know what? I think it's going to be the case. So I'll lead this and say I was fortunate to be on the position paper for AID and exercise.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed it. Saw how much hard work yourself and Desi put in. Random comments coming in all over the place, and I'm sure everyone else was a little bit more organized than me, but having to deal with all that and pull a consensus on when you're on RA therapy, these are the things that will stop you going low, these are the drivers. And then you go and do 500,000 data close to half. So what things have changed? Well, tell us a little bit about because that 500,000 makes my eyes water. How have you got to assess it? You're some data scientist somewhere who's doing
So I think the storyline is which comes back to the word improve. So we have
evolving.
Exactly. We have published 2020's position paper for exercise and diabetes. We did the same for AID focus in 2025. And there are clear statements where should be the focus on and when to avoid hypoglycemia and avoid hyperglycemia. So we have, together with a big company, where they were assessing over years CGM values, the request, can we assess particularly exercise? And we did also deliver their constantly data. There are also a whole lot of participants from our side included. And at the end of the day, I think it was data from 3,300 people with type 1 diabetes, close to 500,000 exercise sessions. It also include intensively walking, not just exercise, but we were also able to distinguish between running, walking, playing tennis, playing football. Amazing. So, and the major learning was, first of all, there's no real increased risk of during or in exercise hyperglycemia. The major risk of exercise hyperglycemia is the first hour after the exercise session. For low readings. Yeah. In general, when you do morning exercise, you do not see an elevated risk of hypoglycemia at all. However, when you do evening exercise, you have a massive increased risk of hypoglycemia at around 3-4 a.m. in the morning. So we were discussing
even on AID.
So it included all hypotherapies. So it's everything together. And, we were 2020 mainly discussing what to do in exercise to avoid hypo. We were 2025 only discussing what to do to avoid hypo.
I mean, we sort of like keep a loop on afterwards, but we didn't really have any data to have.
Exactly. But this is what it is about. Maybe we are idiots. Maybe we should focus.
No doubt.
We should focus, Desi, Mike, myself, and all the people should focus more on the post-exercise management instead of solely focusing on the in-exercise management. But at the same time, I just think we have not all the rules available when you have type 1, grab one and then it's fine. But focus on the post-exercise phase. And the first hour looks so important. And maybe I would change one sentence in our positions paper where we were saying that end, this is very important, at the end of the exercise session, go back to your regular glucose target. I do not recommend this anymore. Stay for 2 hours on the elevated glucose target.
So I've got something for you here because we wrote this together and I did those horrible tables in the ISPAD 2022 guidelines. But if you look at that table, it says, if after 4 p.m. you do exercise, you have 3 options. You can, 1, reduce your basal insulin by 20%, whether it's long-acting or whether it's basal insulin. Number 2, if you're less than 10, 20 grams of carbs without anything. And number 3, very important, especially for people who don't like to push their glucose up, 20 grams of protein, especially whey protein out of seen. And if people are listening, why is that the case? The theory would be is that the amino acids that get broken down by the whey protein, specifically, what's the big amino acid? There's, it's going to do me nothing. I'll
No,
the anabolic one.
okay.
I can't remember anyway. One of the amino acids. I should know it
Yeah.
there. It's the dietitian. That's shocking from me. But one of the amino acids that's with a signal for mTOR, a very strong, is also one that goes to the alpha cells in the pancreas and supports glucagon release.
Yeah.
So just that little minuscule bit of glucagon, where we've shown many glucagon doses, you can get it from your own pancreas, presuming you've got enough alpha cell capabilities. But if people don't want to have carbs before bed and they want to have protein, especially in the days of GLP-1s, for example, 20 grams of protein, whey protein, little whey shake, and it's not to bodybuilding, no, but it's really, but that's the perception. And the perception is if you take whey protein and a pot of muscle, they find it was that easy. But that's a really key point. They got 500,000 data points. They just start our tables from 2020. It's all there.
Exactly.
I'll put it into our calculators for people.
And this holds true. We still are recommending in the 2020 position paper this protein story to overcome or avoid hypo. But one recommendation from my perspective is not correct. We have given in this position paper, and so stay on an elevated glucose target. I think if you have this increased risk of hypo in the post-exercise period, stay for another 2 hours on the 150.
And are you saying a bolus reduction if the meal is within that nasty period as well?
Yeah.
Probably like 25% off an AI?
Yeah, so we are still recommending the 25%.
And then maybe 50. Like it's individual.
But at the same time, we just finished a study now where we did this as the pre-exercise run dose reduction, but we are recommending 25% reduction. And it might be for one system on a lot. Not hard to say now, it does not hold true.
Do you need 50? Or less?
Full bolus.
Full bolus?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Full bolus.
I think it's again, this is where you put the target on like 90 minutes before. Exactly. So, I mean, that's not going to realize it, does it? That's a problem. So, it's giving us to do that's not the reality. But anyway, that's cool. So, that's interesting. So, we basically covered off there. I think it's also very important. When people are vigilant, which is during the exercise, they manage to find sleep, they don't do anything. But then afterwards, actually, that's the key point where your guard is down. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, you've now got some strategies. I'll put together a leave piece for people so they can know what to do. So I just want to respectfully your time, first of all, for the support you give me with your several lives, for calming me down with random 6 o'clock emails. I remember giving you a voice where it was like, you're going to have to type that down because I can't understand what you're saying, too fast. But also just having an interest and being willing to, just like have a conversation. And like we just had here, people listening to this, I hope will take away. CGMs are amazing, but still have in your mind, if in doubt, get the thing to put her out. And especially during exercise with insulin on board, is a massive one. We now know that some systems may need to 5% more time in range, although maybe that system is now out of the sense where you don't need that. We can't wait for the data to see that. And we've also now got making sure the post-exercise period is done. I'll give you another reason why I think in the morning you're not seeing a drop is because during the day, you've got an accumulation of bolus insulin in long tails. So you're not actually at true basal conditions at any point. If you say 0.2 grams per kilo bolus, it's a 6-7 hour tail. If you have one at 2 p.m. and then 6 p.m. Like that's going to midnight and it's not basal conditions. So I'm not insulin board is my thing at the minute. So I'll leave that there. But I just want to say thank you. ATTD. Anything major that you've picked up for ATTD that you're excited about, obviously?
I'm not allowed to say too much, but we were working on the artificial pancreas consensus.
Okay.
And
or is that one with all like the weird potentially different, what the definitions are?
Exactly. At the same time, we saw some data published of fully closed, but this was quite of interest. And we saw some great presentations around exercise from Mike, Desi, Clemens. So from my perspective, I think the future is promising with all the technology, with novel insulins maybe coming up next. But at the same time, I think the most important part, do exercise.
Yes, exactly. From the first thing with anything, I've had loads of videos. Is the most watched thing. People came and said, I can't believe someone said they would rather have a HbA1c of 7% and be really active versus a HbA1c of 6.5.
But the combo,
exactly.
6.5 plus doing every day.
Here it is. So thank you for listening. And what I've learned from ATTD is how to optimize some of the AID settings for Tandem, all of them. And we're going to put that in the AID series coming up soon. So thank you for tuning in. Done.